So, since it's the holiday season, what kind of fiber are you looking for Christmas? Maybe you're going to get it for yourself, or maybe you're hoping someone's going to get some for you. That's what we're going to talk about today. Hey, welcome back. It's Kathy at Wool Maven. I'm glad you're here. And like I said, today we're going to talk about what fibers maybe you'll consider getting for Christmas. I've got it kind of divided out into how I more tend to think of fiber, which isn't straightforward, fine, medium, long. I do it a little bit differently than that. Nothing too crazy. More from a beginner's perspective, in that once you have things going, like you can work the wheel, how can you step it up a little bit and expand your spinning, but not go too crazy? So, not end up with something that was too big of a jump for you. So, that's what I'm thinking here. So if you're an advanced spinner, maybe this will give you some ideas, but to be honest with you, it's more geared towards the newer folks, people who are brand new or people who are starting to get comfortable with their wheel, would like to expand a touch, but nothing too crazy. All righty, so consulting my list here. On the finer end of things, well, let me restart. We'll start with the middle grounders, which I tend to call the workhorse wools. And I'm going to probably use fiber, wool interchangeably. I generally tend to talk about wool. So the workhorse wools, those are the middle grounders that will be great for just about anything. You can spin them thin, you can spin them thicker. They tend to be very user friendly. So if you whatever you started with and you want to expand out a touch just to try something new, because as and I was going to say as you know, but maybe you don't, because when I was new, I certainly didn't know that all wools are a little bit different. So even though they might say, the staple length is 3.5 inches, well, 3.5 inches on one and 3.5 inches on a different reed, it can be very, very different in experience and how they work for you. So once you get going, and I'm assuming you started with one of the classics for beginners like Cordale or Blueface Leicester. So that's my first recommendation. If you are looking for a gift for yourself to get started with spinning, I would definitely recommend you start out with Cordale, Blueface Leicester, Romney, or Cheviot. Those are some solid choices that most any wool supplier is going to have for you. Those are pretty beginner friendly fibers, and they draft well. They just are very, I'd use the term biddable. It's almost like they want to help you spin. We're not, and there's nothing. Sometimes the beginner fibers tend to get overlooked because they're not the new cool thing. You're not going to hear people talk all about the awesomeness of Cordale, because sadly, because it's been awesome and still is for a really long time. So the only fault Cordale has, for instance, Blueface Leicester, Romney, Cheviot, these are all in the same kind of group here. The only fault they have is that they aren't the new cool thing. They aren't a newly imported breed or something that's recently available. But these are solid, solid places to start. So if you are thinking about getting started with spinning this year, a great place to start would be to get a hold of some comb top, which is the preparation that's very common. That's most of what you're going to be buying. So you're going to get comb top in, as I mentioned, Cordale, Blueface Leicester, Romney, or Cheviot. And I'd get a couple of them at least. That way, if one of them for some reason isn't working out super great for you, maybe the other one will. Now, if you are already working at your wheel and things are going fairly good, so you're getting yarn to hold together and you just like to try something a touch different. So still be very beginner friendly, but a little bit expand your horizons just a touch, which is a great idea, because jumping huge into something very, very different might work, but it might end up in a ton of frustration. So generally, it's easier to branch out to something that's a little bit closer to what you're working with now. So some more workhorse yarn or workhorse wools, which might more commonly be called mediums. But more workhorse wools that I would suggest for you to at least consider giving a shot, got my list here, are I've got, can't see it. I've got Jacob, Tunis, Dorset, Black Welsh Mountain, Zwartbles, and Shetland. Now, Jacob, Tunis, Dorset, those are all getting talked about a little bit more. And I have used, I've used all of them. Jacob and Tunis especially are getting a little bit more press. They're very easy to work with. Very, I'll call them open. They kind of don't compact down. So when you want to draft, which means pull the fibers apart like you would most times for spinning, when you want to draft, since they don't compact down to begin with, they just kind of they're already at an easier place for you to start. And I would put Dorset in that same boat. The reason I kind of left Dorset out is Dorset is a very common breed. So it's not talked about very much in that it's basically everywhere, at least I'm in the eastern half of the United States. And for the eastern half of the United States, Dorset is a very, very common white-faced wool sheep. So it's more overlooked because it's everywhere and it's really nothing special, but it's great wool to work with. It's very, very easy to work with, very beginner friendly, and honestly pretty easy to get a hold of. So then the other ones that I read off were Black Welsh Mountain, Zwartbles, and Shetland. And for the Black Welsh Mountain and the Zwartbles, those are both naturally colored wools, and the Shetland may or may not be. There's a variety pack there. But the Black Welsh Mountain, it looks to me like chocolate. And then the Zwartbles is a little bit darker than that. And those two are they're both very beginner friendly. The very beginner friendly. The Zwartbles is a little bit more, has a little bit of a softer hand to it, a softer feel, and has a bit of a kind of a reddish cast to it. And I'll go with the occasional white, I was going to say hair, that they're wool fibers. So between the two of them, the Zwartbles and the Black Welsh Mountain is darker. But separate, they both look dark. But together, the Black Welsh Mountain is actually darker. And the Black Welsh Mountain is also a little bit more crisp and a little bit more rustic feeling. But they both spin really, really well. Now, Shetland, the reason I left that out of the first little talk there with Zwartbles and Black Welsh Mountain is Shetland is such a variety pack. Shetland, there's some Shetlands that are double coated. There's some Shetlands that are fine fleece, so they just have a single coat, and maybe not even actually a medium wool, maybe technically speaking a finer wool. But my experience with Shetland is that it has been very biddable, very easy to work with, and will do just about anything. Quite a nice wool. And I really like the fact that anything comes in natural color. I think that's cool. So I like the options. And then you can always, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can also over dye a naturally colored wool. Even a fairly dark one will still take a good amount of dye. So that's a cool thing to try and experiment with. So on to branching out from your mediums. And once again, if you're a beginner, medium, the workhorse yarn, the workhorse wools, which would generally be referred to as the mediums, are definitely the place to start. Once you're comfortable with your wheel, you can go either finer or longer, is how I tend to look at it. So we'll talk about the finer ones. Finer, and this is not technically speaking fine. Technically speaking fine means that it is less than 23 microns, which is telling you how thick the shaft of the individual staple of wool. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about finer in the world of wool, and these would be all next to skin soft. They'll require a touch more finesse than your Cordell or your Blue Face Leicester, but once you get Once you get decently comfortable with the wheel and you're pretty sure your yarn's going to hold together, at least most of the time, it breaks for everybody once in a while, then give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. And if you want to go into more of the next to skin soft, these are great options. And the options I have listed out, and there's plenty more. This is just the ones off the top of my head that I've used. They're Polworth, Targhee, Falkland, and CVM, which is California Variegated Mutant. Polworth is um, basically a Polworth is a merino cross. It's also called an ideal. For some reason, there's a breeder in, I think, Maine who's working on creating an American Polworth, but otherwise there aren't Polworths in America, which is sad because they sound awesome. And actually, it is one of my favorite wools to work with. Wow, is it nice? It's not quite merino soft, but really, really close, and a noticeably longer staple length than merino. Still not hugely long, but longer. And when you're new, especially, that little bit of extra length really, really helps you out. Polworth is super nice. Give it a shot. Targhee, same deal. Targhee is a cross, a Rambouillet cross that was developed in, I thought, Utah in right around 1920, maybe a little bit sooner than that, to be a range sheep. And it is a nice, finer wool, not quite fine. Occasionally, some of the sheep do actually have a fine wool, technically speaking, but most of the time it's just finer. And it is wonderful to work with. Very, very nice. I found it to be a touch shorter than the Polworth, but that would depend on more what you get specifically. The next one's Falkland. The Falkland I got, as in Falkland Islands, was a very soft, pretty long stapled, and it had more of like a pearly feel to it. It reminded me very much so of embroidery floss. I really liked it. The only kind of thing to note about Falkland wool is it's not a specific breed. It's all it's a variety pack of sheep that are similar but not the same. So you could get a Falkland that's pearly like I did, or maybe you get one that's more like a Polworth. It depends on the individual batch that you get. But my experience with it was great. Super nice. And like I said, almost weirdly soft. Wow, was it nice. And then the last one I have here is your California Variegated Mutant, which once again is abbreviated as CVM. The really cool part about CVM is there's a ton of variety. A ton of variety, all kinds of natural colors, which once again, I get a huge kick out of that. And it is a very soft fiber. I have to admit, I'd say a touch more complicated. It requires a touch more finesse than the other three. So if you're still on the newer end of things, I'd go with Polworth if you're looking for a pretty solid choice that would be fairly beginner friendly, but a little bit more fine than you're used to. And probably the most demanding, at least in my experience, of the four is going to be the CVM. And only because it is so fine, and that makes it a touch more complicated to work with. But since it's awesome and has all those great colors, it's definitely worth a shot. Now, since we went the mid-range with the workhorse and we went to the finer, now we're going to go to the longer. The easiest place to go to kind of expand your horizons longer is locks. And by that, I mean like the long curls that you see hanging off the sheep. And some fun places to start there are Teeswater and Wensleydale. And Border Leicester would be another one there too. You get the pretty long, they hang in almost like pearly curls. Lovely, lovely, lovely. And you can spin them up in an artsy kind of way. You can kind of shred them up in your fingers and make a little cloud and spin from that. You can kind of partly spin them, then leave the tail sticking out of the yarn. That's always a fun one. If you want to go into locks, but a little bit on the finer end, blue-faced Leicester that hasn't been carded out, so just the locks of blue-faced Leicester, those are nice. They'll be a touch shorter than the others we've got here, but still wonderful, lovely, shiny, really cool. I like locks in case you can't tell. And then on the more rustic end of locks would be something like a Leicester long wool. And those are less crimpy. They're more of like a wave rather than a curl. And then there's also in the long section of things is Icelandic. And that's not really locks exactly, but you get a variety pack. There's a lot more Icelandic becoming available, especially from small farms, and it's fairly beginner friendly to work with. It's probably going to be a little bit more on the rustic side of things because there's a double coat there. So if you'd like to try something that's a longer wool and that might just be available fairly locally to you, or at least you could support a small farm, Icelandic might be the way to go. Okay, now what if you're thinking, yeah, I've been spinning for a little while now, and I'd like to add a little bit more pizzazz. And to me, that says maybe you're thinking you like to add a little sheen, a little shine to your work. So, where I go with that immediately is mohair. I get a huge kick out of mohair. I really like mohair, especially the kid mohair. Wow, it's soft. It's wonderful to work with. You can use it plain, you can blend it in stuff. I like it. And it has a pearly shine that it adds to your wool blend. So of course you could use it plain. Plenty of people do. I tend to blend it in because I like the shine and then it also adds strength as well. Another place to get sheen is any of your silk blends. I have used it tends to be around a 20% silk blend, and wow, is that silky. You'd think you'd need more than 20% to notice the silkiness. Nope, 20% can really do it for you. And there's tons of great blends out there. And the one I'm working with right now is a merino, but beautiful, beautiful, and wow, 20% silk you can really feel it. It's just lovely, lovely to work with. And then the other one in the shiny category, at least for me, is Gotland. In Gotland, it comes this way straight off the sheep. It is nice and shiny and silky straight off the sheep. I will say, if you're having trouble, this one's going to be a little bit more on the like advanced beginner end. I had trouble getting Gotland to hold together because it is a slippery little guy. But once you get it, wow, it's really nice. And then even more impressive, at least for me, was when you knit it up, how soft and lovely and shiny the knitted fabric is. So at least for me, it was worth it to work through the Gotland kind of frustration because it kept breaking. But once I figured it out, wow, did it make a lovely, lovely yarn. And of course, you could always, if the Gotland's a little too slippery for you, you could blend it with something else to get a little bit more grabbiness, but still be the vast majority Gotland. So you've got some options there. And I should mention, most of the Gotlands are that lovely, lovely, naturally that gray color. So that's pretty hard to pass up too. Then the other thing that would be, at least I think of as kind of expanding your horizons and a little bit of treating yourself for the holiday season would be to go with to go into a little bit of color work. And what I mean, and there's kind of two ways to go about that. You can go with the natural colors, which most times is white or off white, but there are tons of options like Icelandic, Shetland, California variegated mutant. A lot of the other breeds are working in colors too. I know Romney has a ton of color. Blueface Leicester has quite a bit of color, but there's a whole variety of all manner of like gray and brown and tan, and then even like a multicolor or a fade where it would start darker. or maybe stay darker at the roots and get lighter as it goes towards the tips. There's really cool options out there as far as naturally colored wools. And then the other option, obviously, is your hand dyed. And most of the time, that would start with white or off white, but sometimes the lighter, naturally colored wools. The two big positives for me for hand dyed wool, which usually you'll see in braids, is that first of all, it gets me color combinations that I probably wouldn't have thought of. And so often, like, the one I'm using right now is a Polworth, hand-dyed Polworth, and it's got some reds and some purples and, like, some, a coppery brown, and it's just and more a little bit more yellow in there, and something I wouldn't have put those colors together, but wow, are they lovely. They're just lovely when I use it. And then so that's one of the main things that is you get the dyer's kind of eye and idea and their contribution to your spinning opportunities. So you get to expand your horizons while you still do the spinning and experience the wool, but with the added kind of coolness of a different person's perspective in the coloring. When you get hand dyed wool, your other option is you can always blend it. So you could use it as is from the braid, but you can also, I mean, who doesn't have white or a lighter colored wool sitting around? And if you're new and you don't have it, if you don't have extra wool sitting around yet, you will. So no worries, it'll happen. But you can take that hand dyed wool and blend it with some of your white, your off white, like maybe a tan or a gray, and it changes the color of what you're making and gives you a whole new range of options. And where this is really really cool is if you want a little bit of color variety, but you still want it to match. Well, if all you did was add like a little bit of white or a little bit of gray or a little bit of a brown, while it's a different color and you can definitely see that, it still all matches. And that's awesome because now you don't have to worry about making something crazy and you thought it would work, but it really doesn't. This will work because it all came from the same source. So I love to play around and get a hand dyed braid and see where it starts and then start adding things in. You could add the mohair to that. You could add some of your silk. You could take your silk blend and add it to one of your like a plain white comb top that you have. Once you get a few options, well, then you can start mixing and matching and seeing what you like, and it's really cool. So hopefully this will give you some ideas of kind of your options of where you could go. And I did not, you'll notice I didn't mention merino. I don't have anything against merino. It's just everybody knows about it. Everybody knows about it. So it's awesome. Same gig with Rambouillet. They're both very well known and kind of all over the place. So I thought I would go with a little bit of a different outlook on things and maybe some breeds that you hadn't heard of or you'd heard of them and weren't really sure if maybe it would work for you or like how like on a scale of should I try it or should I maybe, leave it for a little while yet? Well, hopefully this will clear it up for you. I also want to mention that I have a course that teaches folks to spin. So if you're interested in learning to spin wool, I would love to have you. You can check it out at woolmaven.com/spinning course and look in the description below. I got a coupon for quite the discount. I would love to have you. Thanks for tuning in, and if I don't hear from you before Christmas, Merry Christmas.